Hello and welcome back to Shelf Center. This is Bryce. Thanks so much for stopping by. Thanks for liking and subscribing. If this is something you end up enjoying, you never know what could happen. Well, we did it. We did it. It's the last one. It's the last of my top 100 science fiction books of all time. This is the top 10, the one we've all been waiting for. I will say I did a top 10 for science fiction about 3 years ago, about this time. And it's changed a little bit. It hasn't changed a ton. And frankly, any book that I read, because I'm ongoing, it's an ongoing fight, battle, some may say, to find the best of science fiction. And so you're going to see that. And I'll talk about at the end of this what I've missed, because I know there's some glaring ones people have pointed out over the years. I still got to get to those. But anyway, this is my list, like I've been saying. And like I said too, it could change again very quickly. Maybe I'll do some shorts if there are any changes. But this is my top 10 of science fiction of all time. So let's jump into it. Number 10, I am going to go with Sand Kings by George R.R. Martin. This is actually a short story collection. It's pretty short. Sand Kings, the eponymous title, is amazing. Or the eponymous short story, I should say, it's so good. Like, it was one of the best short stories that I've ever read, and so it had to launch to the top here. My poor book is falling apart, but also there's some gems in here. There's some just really good ones. So it's not just Sand Kings, though. I definitely recommend read Sand Kings. Let me know what you think. This is definitely where I started thinking about maybe I like some horror, because there's some horror elements in this. And it really, just not to mention the sci-fi elements, and it's Martin, and maybe I have a little bit of bias, with some of his other material in the fantasy realm, but he's one of the best for a reason. Number nine, we've got the Revelation Space Universe. I, for some reason, don't have the first book. Don't ask me why. I read it a while ago, and it didn't survive a move, is really the best explanation. But this, you've got he adds detective elements to these. There's it's very hard science fiction. Reynolds himself got a PhD in astronomy, worked for the European Space Agency, and just writes amazing books. As far as I'm concerned, one of just the top science fiction writers that's still going today. They're just so many cool ideas. There's so many alien, very foreign concepts. I like just putting you out of your comfort zone to just have to experience something that you've never thought of before. Just some of the uses of science and just in mathematics and kind of keeping it grounded in reality and real physics, and so it's really, they're just so good. And then not to mention, they've just got also great characters. Like I said, it'll be like a mystery, or a detective kind of noir, which is this one, and you're just like, this is amazing in a sci-fi kind of world. But then you've got these cool ships that can essentially, they're a 3D printer, but for space and for anything. It's so cool. So anyway, there's just so many concepts that are just flying at you. Then you're meeting just, things out in space. It boggles your mind. And I remember there's just certain scenes that they'll never leave my mind, because there was just I could vividly picture them in my mind, just meeting this anyway, I don't want to spoil anything, but just the sheer gravity of things, it's amazing. All right, number 8, I'm going with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's so good. I know I've had a lot of humorous sci-fi in here. This is as, I guess, humorous as it goes. I have consistently said, look at my copies are just, could I get more different copies of everything? It's that's what I went, and here's what I have. It's just because they're easy to find at used bookstores, frankly. But anyway, if they do, like I've said before, I said in my, maybe recent review video, but So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, they kind of progressively get worse, I guess, but in only a comparative sense. It's still good. I still quote it. There's still some great quotes that I read in my review. they all are hard to compete with the best, with the first, and even the second, the restaurant at the end of the universe. They make me laugh. I'm quoting them constantly. Like it just, there's things that are in them that are just so like cleverly put, or it just makes you just chuckle at life in general. And you just, I also have said this many times, but also you I don't wonder why he allegedly had like writer's block later in life, because there's just, when every single line is just so quotable, or at least the vast majority of your lines are quotable like this, how are you going to keep up on that? It just seems, it's amazing. So anyway, especially when even my least favorite, I've still got so many quotes that I was able to pull out of it that your average book, you're not able to do that. And I love quoting. I love, acting like I'm better than people by quoting books. I think it was Oscar Wilde said, quotation is a serviceable substitute for wit. When you lack wit, you gotta just quote somebody else, it works. Number seven, we've got Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. This is one I've been meaning to do a reread on because I really liked it. It's very martial, very Heinlein vision, but also just killing bugs and so much action and so many crazy things. I think this is probably part of the reason why I've struggled with books like Armor, or even The Forever War, because they were kind of similar, but just didn't get me like this one did. So anyway, Starship Troopers, it is just nuts. From going through a crazy boot camp to going and fighting the bugs and for your country. Anyway, so but it's just. For me, it was just more because I didn't, when I read it at the time, focus on the larger picture or anything like that it was getting at. It was just like, whoa, this is crazy nuts. And the boot camp is hard and they're crazy, and okay, and then the aliens are also just scary and need to be shot. So anyway, number 6, this is a recent addition since the last list went up, and this is going to be Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers, Arkady and Boris. What a book that just will get you thinking long after you've read it. And I know it's not for everyone. It is very Russian in just the simple idea of a roadside picnic, which I thought while reading it was a bad name. The more I've come away from it, that's really what I've drawn from it. And so it's definitely, or continue to draw from it. So Roadside Picnic works for me. I've officially approved the name. But it's so Russian, and if you've read some Russian, you'll understand that, some Russian authors. But in all the best ways, and again, gets you thinking. Best sci-fi for me is that really just getting you either very thoughtful or just shooting bugs, alien bugs, lots of action. But Roadside Picnic is one of those more on just on the level of thought-provoking. There's some action parts and there's some exploration, but essentially there's these zones on Earth that were touched essentially by aliens for just a brief moment. They essentially took what they needed or didn't and left kind of, I don't know, whatever you might leave at a roadside picnic that you have. And so it's very just such a cool concept, and just instead of like humans are the center of the universe, it was very much like humans are the ants at the picnic, and it's just such a different point of view than you usually see in your science fiction. I'm looking at you, Heinlein. No, man, I haven't read a ton of Heinlein either, but that it really just. It was so different, but it really just got me thinking. Number 5, it's gonna be my last by this author. I know I've included a number, but I love this author. So this is gonna be my top one of all time by Kurt Vonnegut, and that's The Sirens of Titan. It helps that this was my first Kurt Vonnegut book that I read when I was in college, and then it was not my last. And Just some of the concepts in it, it's like an interesting story enough on its own. But then you've got Kurt Vonnegut's witticisms. His like, instead of explaining to you how this like science fiction idea he has in it like works, he explains. He puts a passage, like obviously a fake passage that he wrote, but a passage from the children's encyclopedia on, and I still remember it's like chronosynclastic infundibulum, and then the children's version like explains how if mommy and daddy, and I just remember dying laughing, and that's what the whole book, it's so funny, but at the same time it makes a good point. And again, I'm not getting into spoilers here, but it's so good. You got to read it if you haven't. All right, you're gonna see what hasn't really changed much, which is these top ones. Number 4, we're gonna go with Heroes Die by Matthew Woodring Stover. He's this is nuts. It's nonstop action and craziness, but also the worst cover ever. No, but also it does have you thinking, especially when you get to book 2. But even this one, it's one of my favorite concepts in science fiction and fantasy, because it's a bit fantasy, but it's essentially this future world. It figures out how to get into essentially a multiverse, like a fantasy world. And so what do they do but just exploit it? And the fantasy world has magic, has all these things that are, anyway, just like a fantasy world. And then the future world people, they have actors, and they have essentially this caste system, and it's very hard to move up or down in the caste system. And but the actors essentially film themselves going into this fantasy world, and then people watch their adventures, right? And then the adventures, of course, involve just completely just messing up, destroying, just overturning this fantasy world. And then the fantasy world, though, they have magic, like I said. They're starting to catch on. And so anyway, it's such a good book, and it's nuts, and it's crazy, and it is not for the faint of heart, just to warn you. Number 3, this one has not changed. And I just actually reread it, and I started out going, how is this in my top 3, about the first like 20 pages, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is in my top 3. Yeah, I forgot. That's why. But this is going to be Hyperion by Dan Simmons. It is just excellent. I had such a blast with it. It is like, what's hard is it's so good that the second book is so jarring, because it's told in such a different way, and you understand why. But essentially it's Canterbury Tales in space. So essentially these pilgrims are heading to the time tombs, and they decide, hey, we've all been pulled together for this. We might need to know about each other a little bit. And so each tells their story. And so you get their story one at a time, and then how each of them reacts to it, and then some things kind of going on in the background. Then you get another story, and you start to kind of be slowly revealed what's even going on here, because you have no real idea. There seems to be kind of like a war in the background, and all these things. So, but these tales, like, they like progressively get better, and the concepts are just true, even though they're kind of crazy, but they seem like grounded again in some kind of reality, in some kind of physics, from time to time. Also some in just kind of like, I don't know, magic probably, but there's aliens, there's all kinds of things that, or at least an alien. And so the Shrike is just a good monster that you don't want to be around, okay? Let's just say that much. Unless you like pain for many, many years. It's no good. So anyway, cannot recommend Hyperion enough. It is just like almost life-changing. There's certain parts that are just hilariously funny, but it is mostly a serious book. But there's one of my favorite characters in it is just it's so nuts. It's so funny. As you can imagine, that's kind of where I'm drawn to a little bit. But that's Hyperion, you got to read it. Number 2, this one is not going to be too surprising, but this is going to be Dune by Frank Herbert. This book I've read now a couple times, and it's good, and it's better each time, frankly. The movie, finally, from Villeneuve, is so good. I actually like the first one better than the second, but nobody needs to get into that controversy. But it finally like really told the story really well, which, you know, was hard to do. There's a lot to this. I even like the classic crazy nuts one, and because I was a sci-fi channel junkie growing up. But Dune is just so intricately written, and a lot of people think it's like this white savior book, which you totally could believe based on just the first book. But it's setting up something just even bigger, which is crazy because of how good this book is. And so it is, I mean, just so many of the things that are, that I remember first trying to read this book, and I was so bogged down by all of the, like, what's a Gom Jabbar? It was just the Space Guild. What does that even mean? Like, what are these things? Like, it was so much thrown at you, but eventually what's cool about this is you get it, and then you get it to where you understand the foreshadowing that's happened, and then it really pays off well in the end. And so it's just such a brilliant book. It's so intricate, but I think even the biggest thing that kind of almost makes it a fantasy, and some might call it somewhat of a science fantasy, but it's the Fremen themselves and how you get to how well thought out this culture is, that just revolves around water. And it's kind of amazing what Frank Herbert did to, I mean, just to create this crazy people that inhabit this desert place, but that are able to make it happen and able to actually inhabit it with its scarce water, even though they are so dependent on water as people are. So that alone, where you start to just, when I start changing my behaviors and start looking around and going, and start conserving water in my daily life, I'm going, okay, this book, it's getting to me. And it's amazing. All right, and finally, my number 1 pick of all time. And again, if you've followed the channel, you're gonna know it. I guess this top 3 has not changed for me. I thought it might, but they're just so good to me. They're just, I really love these books so much. What would you say if there was a science fiction, it's a duology, that it follows Shakespeare, Troy, the siege of Troy, adds elements of the gods of essentially the Greek or Norman pantheon? They're the same, right? Of the gods, and it's one of just the best books of all time, and that's what I'm talking about with Ilium. This is so good, and it's obviously sequel Olympus, which really they're just kind of one huge book. Dan Simmons does it again, but this is my favorite. I know most people consider Hyperion to be their favorite Dan Simmons, but I absolutely love Ilium and Olympus. These are just the best for my money. That concept of like this, like Shakespeare in space, but then you've got like the Trojan War and elements of that which thrown in there, and then, you know, Olympus, the gods. There's so many things to this. There's just these interesting ships they take. There's this kind of mystery, like what the heck is even going on? There's like elevated humans essentially, and I need to do a reread. I've been literally almost like on the verge of doing another read of this because it's just that good. It's so good. I cannot recommend this series enough, and I don't see anyone talking about it. That's my list. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Now, I can firmly acknowledge my weaknesses, my lackings, where what I've been told is I've got to read Werner Vinge, A Fire Upon the Deep. I've owned that book at some point. So that's a big one that's on my list. It might just upend the whole top 10 right now if I read it, but it could. I've heard it's great. There's Ursula Le Guin. I have not read enough of her science fiction, just mostly focused on her fantasy. So there's a big one. There's just a lot of authors out there, and it's so hard to keep up. And I even want to just keep up with my favorite authors that I already am way far behind on, or then give Peter F. Hamilton another chance. I'm working on it, okay? But this, to me, is my top 100 science fiction books of all time. Thanks again for stopping by, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.